Hey y'all, it is Gunnar Jethridge and welcome to the Phantom Jacket tutorial. This is the perfect piece for that kind of chilly night in summer. This is also a really great piece for fall, for spring. It's a good transitional piece. I made my sample out of denim, but this would be so gorgeous in like a leather. You could do this in satins, you could do this in brocades. Truly, this piece will look so different depending on the fabrics that you use for it, so have fun with it. All of the notions are included in the pattern along with the size charts and the fabric that you're going to be needing. If you decide to make this piece, please tag me, leave a review. If you ever have questions, also feel free to reach out in the Discord group, on Etsy, email, however is convenient for you. And without any further ado, let's make the Phantom Jacket. Okay, let's begin by working on the back piece. There's a dart here at the bottom. I went ahead and marked the back with a little bit of wax-free tracing paper and a small rotary wheel. I got both of these at Joann, but you can also get them on Amazon if you don't have those. They're fairly inexpensive and they come in very handy. So I went ahead and marked the darts because the first thing we are going to be doing is we're going to be stitching the darts with right sides facing. I like to pinch the dart in half right here, and that way I can make sure that the dart is equally pinched in half. So let me go ahead and add some pins and then let's sew. Okay, so I'm just going to be stitching my dart, and I'm using a contrasting thread on this because I'm using a denim and I like the look of a contrasting thread on denim. So just know that when you see me using golden thread, that's why. Okay, and now repeat this to the other side, and then let's give these a good press so they're nice and flat. And now that I have sewn the darts on the back, I am just going to flip the two back pieces onto one another with right sides facing. And I am just going to pin this all the way up the center back, and then we're going to stitch these together. Okay, now let's stitch. Okay, I just stitched this, and we need to talk about the top stitching for a second. Top stitching is totally optional, and if you're not familiar with what top stitching is, it's what shows on the outside of a garment, and it's done on top of the seam on the outside of the fabric. So I'm going to be doing a top stitch on this because this is denim and I like the look of it. So as the video progresses, you will see me top stitching our seams down. Now you can do top stitching one of a few different ways. You can top stitch both sides down flat, a stitch over here and then a stitch over here. It will give you like a double line. It's called a luggage stitch, and a lot of people like to use that. It's very decorative. Some people will fold it to one side and then stitch that down, and then on the outside you'll just have one singular stitch running down the center back. That's also a very popular style. On this jacket, I think I'm going to be doing a series of both of these styles, but I did want to let you know about the top stitching because it's going to determine how you press the garment, because you need to be pressing your seams. Also, if you're working with a fabric that is really pretty and doesn't need a top stitch, there's no need to do it. This is an optional step. I just wanted to show you guys and give you guys the heads up that this is what's going to be happening. So for my center back, because it is in the very center, I am just going to do a open seam here. I'm going to press it nice and flat, and then I'm going to stitch both sides of this down as my top stitch. So right on each side of this, and it will show on the outside here 2 yellow lines. Now we're going to talk about our back belt panel. So you should have cut 2 of these, and I am just going to pin these together with right sides facing at the center back seam here. It's marked on the pattern. So let me just place a couple pins here. And I am going to stitch this together, and then we're going to press it open and then stitch it with a top stitch just like I did on the outside here. So let me go ahead and take care of that. Okay, and now I'm just gonna press this open and then give this a top stitch. Okay, now it's time for us to attach the back bodice to the back belt panel. As you can see, they're both kind of curved here. This one's a little more curved than the top, but we are going to be attaching these with the right sides facing. We're gonna match up the center seam, and we are going to pin all the way along. Now there is a notch on the back belt panel that should line up with the dart of the back bodice panel. I'll show you that really quick on the pattern. This, once sewn together, will line up right there in the center, which is a good helpful way to make sure that everything is lining up correctly for you. Okay, now that I have pinned this together, it looks like this. I'm gonna go ahead and sew all the way across, press it, and then top stitch it. And now it is time for us to attach the lower back bodice to the back belt panel right here. There is no seam in this one. You should have cut this one on the fold. This one is going to get attached with the right sides facing, just like this. And I'm gonna pin all the way across here. Okay, now let's go ahead and stitch, and then afterwards we will press it open and then give it a little top stitch if you are top stitching everything. Okay, now it is time for us to talk about the front of the Phantom jacket. So you'll see that these three sections here is the front belt, the middle front belt panel, and the side front belt panel. They are all going to be going together. We're gonna do this one side at a time as well. So I'm just going to attach the front belt here to the middle front belt with our right sides facing, just like this. Just like that. And now while I'm here, I am also just going to attach, I'm just going to attach K, the side front, right here where it goes as well. We might as well just sew them all together at the same time. Now there are notches on these to help you line them up, if that's helpful. Okay, I have now got these pinned together, and I'm gonna go ahead and stitch both of these, and then afterwards we're gonna press them open and then give them a top stitch if that's what you're doing. Now let's go ahead and give it a press in the top stitch. Okay, now I'm going to be attaching the lower front bodice right here to our belt panel that's in the middle, like the corsetty section. So I'm just going to flip this up with right sides facing, and we are going to pin this together all the way across. Okay, now that we have pinned these together, let's just sew. Okay, now we're going to talk about the side front bodice and the lapel. I have a little post-it note over mine because this is our sample pattern and I wanted to change a few things up. So just know that this is piece G that I am working with. Now what we're going to do is attach the side front bodice to piece G right here with right sides facing. There's a notch right here to help you line them up. So I am just going to place them together with right sides facing and pin them the whole way up here. Okay, and now that we've pinned this, I am going to go ahead and sew, and then afterwards I am going to do some pressing and some stitching. You might have to do a little bit of snipping here at the rounded areas after you've sewn it so that you can relieve a little bit of that tension and get a really good pretty press. But let's go ahead and take care of this. All right, and now it is time for us to attach the top to our midsection in the bottom. So I'm just going to put these together with the right sides facing. This seam here is going to align with this seam on the midsection as well. I actually think it's probably helpful to pin it on both sides of the seam if you're doing top stitching because you want all of that to line up, especially because it's going to be a focal point. Now I'm just going to pin all the way across here. Okay, so I have laid the front on the back here. I've got right sides facing, lined up. I am now going to go ahead and attach the shoulder seams on both sides here. I'm just gonna be pinning them together and then doing a stitch all the way across, just this little section right here. After I stitch, I'm gonna press it open and then do a zigzag on the edges, or you can do your top stitch, whatever you're doing. As you can see, I'm using a denim, so mine's gonna fray on the inside, but no one's gonna see it because we are lining this. So let me go ahead and stitch this and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, now it is time for us to pin our sleeve in. If you will notice on the pattern itself, it does tell you where the back armhole is. That's important because the back and the front are not identical. So I'm just gonna start pinning here at the back side to make sure that I'm pinning the correct side in. I have right sides facing. I'm gonna pin this all the way around here. Now, if you're working with a tricky fabric that's not very forgiving, you might need to do a small gather stitch at the top of the sleeve to ease it into the armhole, although this should fit pretty well. Okay, and once you have it pinned in, you are going to stitch around the outside edges, and then afterwards we're going to either overlock it and then do our top stitch, which is kind of tricky around an armhole, but definitely possible. And then we are going to repeat it to the other side. So let's go ahead and start stitching. Okay, and now it is time for us to close up the underarm seam here. You see how these line up? I'm gonna go ahead and start pinning at the bottom of the sleeve here, and I'm gonna work my way all the way up to the underarm and then all the way down. It's gonna be one really long seam, essentially. Okay, now let's talk about the inner lapel detail. I have gone ahead and pinned the outer edge all the way at the top and across together. It's labeled outer edge here. And now we're just gonna sew all the way up and then all the way over, and then we're gonna trim away the seam allowance, turn it right side out, and then give it a good top stitch. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and stitched this. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna trim away half of the seam allowance that's here right now. Particularly in this corner, and then half of the seam allowance at the top. Now, I'm gonna flip this right side out, and I'm gonna turn all the corners out nice and sharp. I'm using this tool. I think this is actually a clay sculpting tool. They have a wood version of this as well for sewing, but I don't know where mine is. So this will work. Honestly, you can really use anything you have laying around as long as it's not too sharp and will not puncture the corner. Okay, and after you have turned it, give everything a good press, and then you can go ahead and give it a good top stitch as well. This lapel is like a double lapel. It's definitely optional. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. I just thought it could be a fun little addition to, you know, take this up a notch and make this feel even cooler. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch. This is the lapel facing right here, and this is going to be showing on the outside because this is what flips out on the outside of the whole entire blazer. Now you'll see here there's a marking that says to insert the inner lapel detail here. And so I am now just going to place my lapel right here. It's gonna line up right at the bottom of this nice and evenly. This is the inner lapel going on the facing. And I am just gonna pin this all the way across just so it stays in place. And now I am going to take our lower front facing here and I'm going to pin this, sandwiching that inner lapel on there. This is all with right sides facing. And now after I do this, I am going to just stitch this all the way across. So let's go ahead and stitch. Okay, now I'm gonna talk about the side front lining. There is a dart on here. I've gone ahead and marked on both sides of this dart, again, using a little bit of tracing paper. And now we are just going to stitch this dart closed. It's pretty small darts. It's not a huge amount. So I'm just going to use some pins here, fold it in half all the way down, and then I can go ahead and stitch. I'm gonna do this to both of these. Just stitch all along here. It's gonna start a little bit narrow, go in a little further, and then it's gonna narrow back out again. So go ahead and stitch both of these and I'll meet you right back here. All right, now let's talk about the back lining. You should have cut this on the fold and you'll see that there is going to be a dart on each side. Again, I have marked those with a little bit of tracing paper. I'm gonna sew these darts just like we did on the front. I'm not gonna demonstrate this because it looks identical to the last step, but you are just going to be folding this in half, pinning all the way up, and then stitching these darts. So go ahead and do both of these darts and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so now I'm going to be attaching my side front lining, which is this right here, to our facing. So I'm just gonna, with right sides facing, pin these together all the way up. Okay, and now that I have pinned this, I am just going to stitch all the way up, and then afterwards I'm gonna do a top stitch or a zigzag or an overlock, whatever you are doing to finish out a seam. Okay, it is now time for us to attach the front lining to the back lining. We are only going to be doing this at the shoulder seam. These next couple of steps are exactly what we did on the front. We're gonna do the shoulders, and then after we finish out the shoulder seams, we're then gonna pin the sleeve in, stitch the sleeve in, and then afterwards we're gonna stitch all the way up the arm and all the way down the sleeve, just like we did before. This assembly is identical. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch the shoulders here. Okay, let's go ahead and stitch these. Okay, I am now going to be pinning my sleeve in. So I'm just going to, with right sides facing, pin the sleeve all the way around and stitch this just like we did on the outer shell. I'm not gonna show you how I did this because it's exactly the same steps as we did earlier, where you're pinning it around the armhole, stitching, and then afterwards we're gonna fold it in half and then stitch that. Okay, now we are going to be working on the collar and the collar stand. The first thing that I am going to do is I'm gonna work on my collar stand here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pin them together with right sides facing. And we are just going to be sewing these outer two edges together first. So I'm just gonna pin the outside edges here. This will be fairly quick. Just like this. Now we're just gonna stitch these outside edges. I'm just gonna do the other side really quick too. Now I am just gonna turn these right side out and give this a good press. Okay, and now I'm going to work on the upper and lower collars here. We're gonna be sewing the sides and then the top together. So what I'm gonna do is I am just going to stitch the sides here, or pin the sides here, I'm sorry, all the way around. Okay, and now it's time for us to stitch. 1/2 inch. And I'm working my way up to this point here. I'm stopping 1/2 inch away from the edge. Gonna leave the needle inserted as I swivel the fabric around while the presser foot is lifted, and then I'm gonna drop it back down. And now I can sew the top, keeping my fabric in line with this 1/2 inch over here. Doing the same swivel and a little back stitch. And now I'm gonna be trimming away about half the seam allowance and turning it right side out and then giving it a good press. Now I'm gonna be pinning my collar stand to the collar. I'm gonna pin it only to one side of it so that way I can do this whole little method where I will flip up the seam allowance towards the inside. So I am just gonna pin all the way across. Just like this, and now we're gonna sew it to only one side. This side is not getting sewn right now. We're gonna do this little flip under method. Okay, so I'm gonna sew it to one side, so I'm gonna kinda like open it up and move it around so I can just get to this edge here. Just like this. All right. And now I'm gonna move this over to the ironing board to show you what we're gonna do. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is, we have a clean edge here, which is really beautiful. I'm gonna lay the clean edge down first, and I'm just going to push all of the seam allowance towards the inside of this collar here. And now I'm gonna roll up the seam allowance here so it's nice and even. You wanna make sure that you're not folding up too much, but it will look something like this on the outside. Now I'm gonna roll this up first and just kind of make sure that, you know, I have got the right amount of seam allowance rolled up, and then I'm gonna give this a good press. Now, if you're using a lighter weight fabric, I actually suggest putting pins all the way across. I am working with a very heavy denim, so it is a little easier to just iron it instead of pinning. Now, what you need to do now is you can either hand sew this closed across, or you can do a top stitch all the way across, which I'm actually gonna do the top stitch because I like the look of it. I'm not gonna top stitch all the way around the collar and this section here, and it's just gonna be really pretty and really decorative. I can show you how I'm gonna do mine, and then you can decide whether or not you're gonna top stitch all of yours, or you're just going to do a little hand stitch right here. It's totally up to you, but both sides of it will be clean and finished out. Okay, I'm actually gonna start with my top stitch here. Slow and steady with top stitching. You want the stitches to be clean and beautiful. I can't tell you how many times I've ruined a project with messy top stitching. Now I'm gonna go around the collar. Now, when it comes to the edge, I like to do a little bit of walking with my machine. Now, I'm gonna go back over just slightly. Now it is time to sew our lining to our outer jacket, but what I'm gonna do first is I'm actually going to be placing my zipper in place first. Now, you should have gotten a 7-inch separating zipper. I'm using a metal one because I like the look of it with this jacket. And now you want to kind of make sure that when you're putting your zipper on, that you want to get everything where it's supposed to go. So I know for sure that this side is going to land over here, and once it's going to be sewn on, I have to put the seam allowance of the zipper next to the seam allowance of the jacket so that when it's sewn together, it looks like this. So this side is going to go here. Now, I am just going to line this up with the corsety belt part of the jacket. It should go right in this section, right in the middle. So my first step is just to pin the zipper into place here. And I've got the seam allowance of the zipper facing the seam allowance of the jacket here. And now I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side with the other half of the zipper. And now you can either leave the pins here or do a quick stitch here just to keep it in place. So I am just going to pin my zipper in here. If you need a tutorial on changing the length of a metal zipper or need a little more facts on those, I do have a video that I think was alive on my Patreon that is still able to access. So you can always reference that. So I've got the zipper pinned in. I've got it right in between that kind of corsety section so I know it's in the right place. And now it is time for us to pin the collar in. So I am just going to align the collar stand here right in the center. Now you can mark yours. Mine has got a little indentation on where the center part is, but I'm gonna put a pin here just for visual sake. And now I am just going to pin my collar stand in place here. I'm starting out at the center and I'm gonna work my way around. You do wanna make sure that the under collar is gonna be the part that faces out. It is cut just a little bit shorter, and what it's gonna do is pull the upper collar down a little bit, just like functionality wise. And now I'm just gonna kind of round the corner over here. Okay. Now I'm pinning all the way to the edges, just like this. And now I am going to lift my camera up here just a little bit so I can see. So now we can see that I've got the collar pinned in on the jacket. I've got the zippers pinned in. I'm just gonna move these out of the way so that we can see everything. The zippers are pinned in. Now what I'm gonna do is lay my lining right on top of my jacket, just like this. They're gonna be facing each other. You'll see that this will line up here. It lines up all the way down. And now we are gonna start pinning all the way across the top up here. And we are going to use a lot of pins so everything is held together correctly. Before we stitch the sides and the center front, we're gonna pin all the way along the bottom now. Now you might wanna pull the sleeves up in here so that they are out of the way. But we're going to go all the way around and we are gonna pin Okay, now after you have pinned the top and the bottom, we are then going to sew. So I'm gonna start at one side and I'm going to go at 1/2 inch. Now you're gonna be just barely missing the inner lapel here. it actually might be helpful to switch over to a narrow zipper foot if you have one. I just find that a narrow sewing foot is going to be helpful with this kind of thing, so I'm gonna quickly switch mine over. Now when you get to the little dot that's on the lapel, we can pick up the needle, or we can pick up the presser foot and lift the fabric and sew straight across here. This is gonna be a lot of fabric you're sewing through because this is the collar stand, the lining, and the outer shell. Now I'm stopping at this little dot as well, and gonna pick up the fabric and move everything over. All right, and now it's time for us to sew the bottom. Okay, one thing to note is that you are going to need to leave an opening in the bottom like this. And in order to leave an opening like this, you need to stop sewing, I'd say about 3 or 4 inches from the center back, and then start sewing on the other side of the center about 3 or 4 inches away. You need about 6 or 7 inches in the bottom open so that you can get in and out. Now, once you have sewn both sides of the bottom and left the gap in the center like I did here, then we are gonna turn our attentions to the center fronts. Now, one thing to note about this jacket is that the outer shell is just a little bit longer than the lining. And what that's going to do is it is going to pull this outer bit up just a little bit, and this bottom part is gonna act like a facing. So that's why this exists like this. So let me grab a couple pins and I'll show you how we're gonna do this. So we are gonna be starting from the top up here, and I am just going to hold on to the top and pull at the bottom. As you can see, it's gonna be a little bit longer down here, like this. So start pinning from the top down. All the way to the bottom. Your zipper is here, so be aware of that. You might be pinning through both layers and the zipper. Now, when you get to the bottom, see it's a little longer, you're just going to pull your finger down and then press it flat, just like this. It's gonna create almost like a little pinch down here at the bottom. So for a little reminder, so I'm gonna put my finger in here, I'm gonna push my finger to the bottom, and then press that flat. And now I'm gonna pin that because we're gonna sew straight up and down here, and it's gonna give us a nice clean line. So let's go ahead and sew this, and then we'll repeat this step to the other side. Okay, now I'm gonna start sewing at the top, 1/2 inch. Start with the back stitch. Working my way down. Now, my zipper is about to start. So I'm using my narrow foot here, which is gonna allow me to get really close to the zipper. Now, when you are working with an invisible zipper, sometimes the zipper pull gets in the way. And what I like to do is leave my needle inserted, and then I'll go in through this hole here in the lining and come over and lift the presser foot. And what I can do now is I can actually pull the zipper pull towards the top a little bit and get it out of the way right? Because like if the zipper pull is in the way, you're gonna have a hard time sewing it. So I just pulled it up a little bit. Now it's not at the bottom and it's free for me to sew there. So let me just go ahead and finish sewing here to the bottom. So this is the end of the zipper. I'm gonna do a little back stitch just to be safe. And now I'm working to the end and I'm gonna sew right over that little pinch at the end. Right there. Perfect. And now I'm gonna repeat the same step to the other side. Okay, so it's about time to turn this right side out. But before we do that, we actually need to trim away a little bit of the seam allowance here. And before you trim away the seam allowance, I'm gonna have you go through and double check and make sure that all of the pins are out, because I definitely don't want you to ruin your scissors, especially if they are your good fabric scissors. We all know how much we protect those. I am just reaching on up in here, double checking. This was a particularly painful jacket to sew because denim is such a stiff fabric and there were pins everywhere. Okay, so I'm just gonna trim away about half of the seam allowance that's here. Oh, look at that, 2 pins. Three pins. Now up here at the top is gonna be really important because we're gonna have to turn this right side out and you want this corner to be beautiful, so. Okay, trimmed that away. Now I'm just gonna turn everything right side out. Then we are gonna go through and give everything a good press once it's turned right side out. And then we can talk about the sleeve linings and the bottom hem that we still have to close up, which is how we're also turning this right side out, is through the bottom hem, by the way. Make sure that you are pressing the points out on those lapels. Okay, so I have actually pressed everything and it's looking really pretty, and it's now time to sew the sleeves to the sleeve lining. I think that this is one of the more confusing parts because sometimes you'll sew it and you'll be like, why is it all twisted? So the first thing I'm gonna have you do is reach your hand into the sleeve and pull the sleeve out. And then I'm gonna have you insert the sleeve lining into the sleeve. So you're gonna have to kind of push it down in there and it will come out on the other end down here. And you'll be able to like obviously put your hand in. This is like a functional sleeve at this point because the sleeve lining is going down through here. Now I do this because I want to make sure that nothing is twisted, and I want to line up the seam right here. This is the inseam sleeve. This is the sleeve inseam, and this is the inseam of the lining. I am going to make sure that those don't get twisted because this is where I find that it always gets tricky, is when you twist it and then you can't get your arm in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to fold this down just a little bit, and then I'm going to fold my sleeve down just a little bit. The seam allowances are still touching, okay? I'm gonna pinch that and hold that. Now, what I'm gonna do is reach my hand up into that lining. I'm gonna reach my hand all the way through that sleeve, just like this. I'm gonna reach my hand through, and then I'm going to pull both of those layers out through the bottom. So now as you can see, This is where they were pinched. Okay, now once I've got them both out, I'm gonna pin them together with the right sides facing right at that seam first, okay? That's my first pin. I know that seems a little tricky, the whole process, but there's nothing more frustrating than sewing your sleeve and then going to put your hand in it and it not being correct. So I'm just gonna pin my whole way around, pinning one layer of the lining to the sleeve. I don't wanna pin through multiple layers. It's just the one sleeve through the sleeve lining. And I'm gonna do this all the way around, just like this. And now after I do this, I am going to stitch. Now because the sleeve is naturally just a little bit shorter because you cut it a little shorter, it's also going to pull the outer sleeve up under just a little bit, just like the bottom of the jacket, and kind of make it feel like a facing. So let's go ahead and sew around the outside edge here. So slow and steady is definitely the way to do this because it's kind of a hard thing to sew, right? Like you're like moving your way around two pieces of a sleeve. Now when you get to the end, you will do a little back stitch and then you will repeat this to the other sleeve. Okay, now the very last thing that you want to do is you want to fold in your seam allowance here, and you want to do a little hand stitch all along the bottom, and you want to secure the lining to the outer shell all on this little section that we left open. If you need help with the hand stitching, I have a tutorial on my Patreon. It's very simple. It's for tiers 2 and up. Go ahead and do your hand stitch all along here. Give everything a good press. Now you are also going to want to press your lapels down on your jacket and give all of that a really good ironing. You can even do little snaps in the corners if you think that's cute, but you are going to want to press those down because it is going to really make this feel polished.